Hello, peoples of the internet. Today I have with me Tamara Barthel from Crew Coaching, and her coaching institution is specializing in working with people with neurodiversity. So I'm quite curious to learn about how Tamara got into this, how they helping families with neurodiversity, such as autism and ADHD, and how they help coaches work with families who experience these issues. Welcome to the show, Tamara.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Tamara, can you tell us how did you get into this field?
I have a son who is autistic. He's 28 years old. And as I was raising him, he actually received a fairly late diagnosis. But even after that later diagnosis, I found it very challenging to find resources, to know whether the information that I had was accurate, to determine whether we were doing the right things for him. We sought resources and were turned away from resources that I now know in hindsight we were eligible for. And for many years, I knew that I wanted to make a contribution to this community and try to help solve the problem of that experience that I had of feeling isolated and having too little access to resources. I was a executive in the high-tech industry in Silicon Valley for a long time. And when I retired, I decided now was the time to be able to make a contribution to this. I became a life coach and started working with individual families. And then I entered a 1-year postgraduate training program at the UC Davis Mind Institute in Sacramento, California. It's part of the UC Davis Medical School there, and studied neurodiversity in that program for about a year. And about halfway through that year, decided, I think I understand what we need to do. And that is to get this information out there in the hands of people like me who still need it, was to start an organization where we could take the information into the communities. Training as a coach is a fairly accessible thing to do. And I decided if we could create a training program that could teach people to be coaches and specifically give them the information that they needed around neurodiversity, around autism, ADHD, learning disabilities, intellectual disability, that they would be able to take those skills and make a difference within their own community. And so that's what we've been doing for the last 3 years, and it's going very well. We've trained many coaches to date. We have over 40 coaches in our network and continuing to do that. Our coaches are all over the United States and in several countries in Europe and Israel. So I'm very excited to be where we are today with it.
It's fantastic to hear. Thank you for sharing that. And it's really beautiful how you went from being a really high level professional in business. As I understand, you were involved with several mergers, acquisition, and
Yeah.
foundings of companies and so forth. And from that, you went on to become a mother. And of course, your son was diagnosed with autism, and you used this to create a support network for families who are going through similar experiences. That's absolutely fantastic. I love your journey. And that's why I really wanted to talk to you on this interview about how does this happen. But first, I heard you said that you became a life coach before you went into this postgraduate program. So how
Mhm.
does one become a life coach and why?
Good question. Good questions. In the coaching industry, there are a couple of bodies that are really governing bodies, and they issue certifications to coaches. And coaching is an unregulated industry, but these bodies really have come up from within the coaching industry to help self-regulate the industry and to make sure that people who are out there providing life coaching services are qualified and that they have a certain set of skills and competencies to really be able to help their clients in the best ways possible. And so the International Coaching Federation is one of those, is really the primary governing body. They have a very rigorous program that's designed to make sure that coaches who go through training that is accredited by them are known to have these certain core competencies and skills. And so when I first became a life coach, I decided I wanted to make sure that I was doing it right and doing the best that I could do with it. And so I decided to go to a training organization that was accredited by the ICF and did that, went through their process, met all the qualifications, and then became a certified coach through the ICF. Fast forward a couple of years later, when I entered that UC Davis Mind Institute program, and I decided if we're going to be training coaches, then we want to make sure that we're doing it to that same standard, right? And so I took a look at the requirements for a training organization from the ICF and made sure that our program meets all of those criteria. So a student who goes through our training program will have all of the training requirements met for the ICF certification. And then there are a few other certification requirements that you would also complete. And I can talk about those if you're interested in those. But our organization is now accredited with the ICF and so can help to provide those coaches in the same way that I was prepared.
That's fantastic that your organization got accredited by the same body where you got accredited as a life coach. So now you can provide these certifications and you can certify coaches who will then go on to support families with
Yes.
neurodiversity. So how do your coaches support these families who might be having autism, ADHD, or some kind of
Mhm.
learning disability in the family?
Our coaches are varied. It's a diverse group of people. We have all sorts of backgrounds. We've got everything ranging from nurse practitioners who've gone through our program to special education teachers and school administrators to moms like me who have raised a neurodiverse child. Our coaches serve their communities in whatever ways they define that they would like to do that. And I'll give you a couple of examples of that and then maybe tell you how we prepare the coaches to do that. But the coaches are prepared first and foremost to provide coaching to the families, or to individuals. So we also support adults with neurodevelopmental conditions like maybe autism or ADHD or a learning disability, for example. So our coaches go through the training and they learn the core competencies in how to coach. And they also learn the latest body of information that we have around the research around neurodiversity, right? Both research and clinical practice, the best of what's coming out of our universities and studies around those topics. The UC Davis Mind Institute program that I went to was called Leadership Education in Neurodevelopmental Disabilities, and that's abbreviated LEND. And there are over 60 LEND programs across the United States. Every state has at least one of them in something that we call a University Center of Excellence for developmental disabilities. And each one of those universities is contributing to the body of research and clinical practice around this set of issues. And so we are closely in touch with a number of those programs, and some of our coaching students have come out of those programs like I did. And so we continuously update the content with the material that's coming out of those university centers so that we're up to date, we're accurate, we know everything is evidence-based and is proven by peer-reviewed research within the medical and academic community. As we prepare our coaches with that information, they make decisions about how they would like to take that back to their community and provide services. So one thing that they all provide, of course, is coaching services. But I challenge the coaches at the beginning of their training to also think about how else could you contribute to this community over and above coaching individuals or families, because there's such a need. We know that we came into this because we all resonate with the fact that it's so very hard to get support and to get accurate information, even still today. And so I challenge them to come with a project that they'd like to work on or collaborate with another coach on. And so we've done a lot of different things. We have developed group coaching programs that target specific kinds of issues that are common. People come together as a group and address those. We've entered into a relationship with California State University, where one of their faculty members helps us with our own research because we have access, of course, to the community. And so it's a great partnership where we can help to perform academic research, and through our relationship with this faculty member at California State University can then have that research reviewed and published. So we have a couple of people working on that. We've got coaches who have identified different issues, like more than one of our coaches is engaged in the process of trying to figure out how do we help young autistic clients with employment, because that's a huge problem for them.
May I just ask about that? In your professional career, before you
Yes.
actually got into coaching, have you encountered any employees with neurodiversity?
Yeah. So I spent the majority of my career up until I retired and turned my focus to this in the high tech industry in Silicon Valley, right? And so those tend to be, it's not universal by any means, but those tend to be careers that attract neurodivergent people with certain kinds of profiles and ways of thinking. So yes, I would say that I worked with and knew many people who had different forms of neurodivergence over my years in Silicon Valley, for sure.
So what would you recommend to employers or corporations who hire people with neurodiversity? What's the best way to approach the relationship with these employees?
There's a couple of things. There's a fair amount of education that's needed, partly because the implications of having a neurodiverse brain are not always as intuitive as we would think. So there's a lot of misinformation out there and a lot of assumptions out there that are really maybe just not correct. There's also the phenomenon that one size doesn't fit all. Every person, every individual, whether they have some form of neurodivergence or not, they're a unique individual. So they're going to have unique needs and unique preferences. And so it's important to understand that too. So I think that for an employer who wants to do well with this, the thing to do would be to talk frankly with the employee about what they need to feel the most supported and make their best contribution. And to remember that that may be a different way of working or a different way of thinking about something than what a neurotypical person might first assume. So remaining open to that and really hearing out and following the guidance of the neurodivergent individual who's in the job to help construct the most productive way forward is something I'd recommend for everybody.
Thank you. I heard you also support the families for the children to get into employment eventually, or some of your coaches do. Apart from that, what's the greatest transformation you have seen as a result of your coaching efforts in any family that you worked with, of course, without mentioning any names?
I'm not taking an exact count, but somewhere in the neighborhood of probably 90% of the coaches that come through our organization and are now trained are either neurodivergent themselves or the family member. Now, to the question of the most impactful story, there was a young girl. She was on the younger age for coaching. She was about 13 when she first came to me. And she was having a great deal of difficulty with social anxiety and with communicating with other people in a social setting. And so her mom reached out to me and said, boy, I feel like we need some help with this. She's having a great deal of difficulty interacting even with teachers or coaches or whoever the case may be. And so do you think you could work with her? And my answer to that was, I think I can work with her, but it's going to depend on what she wants to do about this. So coaching is not something that would, for example, teach you how to talk to people, or do some of the sort of what we think of as traditional training around social skills. Like, we're not going to teach you to make eye contact. We're not going to give you a pat set of answers about here's how you conduct a social conversation. Instead, coaching is a process of really deep listening to what's happening with the individual and then helping them figure out what they want to do about the situation. And so I explained to this mom that I will talk to your daughter and let's get a sense for what her internal experience is with this. What's her lived experience? And then let's see what she wants to do. And so when I met with her, I asked her that. I said, Mom's thinking it might be good to have some help with social interaction. And what I'd like to know is, how do you feel about these social interactions that you're having? And what would you like to see that be like? And her answer to me was that they're super uncomfortable to me. It's just awful, but I would like to get good at it. And my response to her was, okay, so there's two scales there. One scale is get good at it. And the other scale is be more comfortable with it, because I'm really concerned that no matter how good you get at it, we need you to feel like it's serving your needs and that you can be comfortable with it. And so we decided to set up the coaching in that way. It was two scales. How do I get good at it? And how do I feel better about it? And so we worked together for about 6 months, and we worked on those two things. And we did a lot of role playing and scenario planning and things like that. And by the end of it, we decided that she was feeling good and had made a lot of progress and didn't need to continue with the coaching. Although we did later have her take a group coaching program on how to advocate for oneself that we have for teenagers, but that's a different story. In the individual coaching that she did, I got a message from her mom at the end of the coaching saying, wow, we typically would go to a school event that she would be involved in. And boy, as soon as that event was over, we are at the door and ready to go, because there was so much discomfort around that unstructured kind of interaction at the end. And last night, we went to a school event and we were waiting at the door, and she didn't come out, and she didn't come out. And we finally went in, and here she was cleaning up after the event with all the other students, laughing, putting chairs away, doing what the students were asked to do, and having a good time. And when she finally came out to the car to leave, her mom asked her, wow, it's such a difference in your interactions. What was it that made that difference? Was it that you're just getting older, or the people, or do you think it was the coaching? And she said, oh, absolutely 100%. It was the coaching. And so now we have a young lady who can navigate her world a lot more comfortably.
That's really beautiful. That's going to have a huge impact on her social and personal life, obviously, like throughout her entire life. So it's
Yeah.
just so beautiful to hear that thanks to your services and what you provide, she was able to do that and become more comfortable with having this conversation.
Yeah. And that's really what coaching is all about. It's really about giving the agency around a situation back to the client and asking them, what do you want to do about this? The reason our organization is called the CREW Coaching Institute is that CREW stands for creative, resourceful, and whole. And that's a primary tenet underlying coaching, is that everyone who comes to us is creative, resourceful, and whole already. And the process of coaching is giving them the opportunity, the space to be able to think about the situation that they're facing, the goal that they've set for themselves, and then decide how they want to go about it and what they want to do about it, and supporting that process for them. But it's 100% agency on the part of the individual who's doing the coaching. And that's a different approach than what we see with a lot of what we might call interventions, if you will, for neurodiversity, right? A lot of those are behavioral modifications and really driven at helping the person function more neurotypically in a neurotypical world. And so we end up with sometimes individuals who are doing that, but there's a common term within the community called masking, which you may or may not have heard. And that means that what they've learned to do is to pretend, to put on this mask and to act in a neurotypical way. But what it doesn't address is the discomfort that creates, and the fact that it it doesn't allow a person to be their unique and genuine self in the world, which is what we need.
Yes, absolutely, because that's what creates the deeper connections that is more fulfilling ultimately. So it doesn't feel like it's an energy drain, but it's
Yes.
actually charging us. All
Yeah.
right. So what are the typical issues that families approach you with?
It's manyfold. And when we do the training, we actually walk through a life cycle of an individual in order to really hit on all those issues. We start in infancy, and then we share the information on neurodiversity that we have, that we know about that life phase. We talk about how these conditions emerge and when they do, and the kinds of things that happen at that time, and how families can be supported at that phase in their life. And then we walk through the life cycle. So after we've looked at all the issues surrounding infancy, we go to toddlerhood, and then school age children, all the issues that they face, and the educational program and how to pursue special education services for children. And then we move into adolescence, which actually we spend quite a lot of time on, because there are a lot of moving pieces in that at that period in time. So there are a lot of issues that may emerge. Then we spend some time on later adolescence and the transition to adulthood. There's a lot in there as well. And then we talk about what the lived experience is like for adults, and what the situation is with respect to our knowledge and services around adult services for people with neurodivergence, and even talk a little bit about aging. And we take a look at the research that's been done on adults. So it really spans the gamut. There are a couple of periods of life where issues reliably emerge, maybe is a way to say it. One, of course, is young families. So when you're seeking a diagnosis or you get a new diagnosis, there's a whole lot to process in that. And so we've got a lot of services and information around that process. Another one I mentioned already is the school system, and working on getting the right supports that your child may need in school. And then, of course, adolescence is a gigantic issue. So there's a lot of changes that happen around the middle school period. And we've actually done some work with our autistic adult self-advocates and developed a program that is specifically for middle school students that helps them with some skills that we hope will carry them through their adolescence and with a more successful transition into adulthood. And then transition, of course, is the other really big one that comes up. And we're really not doing a good enough job there. There are transition services available from schools. Those are absolutely necessary and useful, but by themselves not sufficient. And so we see a lot of neurodivergent young adults struggle when they leave school and enter the adult world. It becomes a very difficult period, that first decade of sorting out where they want to be in the world and how they want to function and what supports they need, what works for them and what doesn't.
Thank you. At what age a child is typically diagnosed with neurodiversity?
The earliest age that a physician or a psychologist would probably reliably diagnose a child with autism would be around the age of 3. And although there are signals earlier than that, markers that we can observe that say this might be a child who could be developing autism a little later. Let's watch and see to make sure that if they are, we can provide them services as early as possible. So 3 years old, though, is generally right now about the earliest age. Now, the average age of diagnosis in the United States, at least, and this is reasonably consistent around the world, is about 5 years old. The average age of diagnosis for ADHD in the United States is 7 years old. And so if you think about that, it's interesting. We can reliably diagnose it at a younger age, and yet on average, we're diagnosing it at age 5 and age 7. What happens around that time? Children go to school. And so what we think about that is that there are a lot of issues that may get flagged at school, right? There could be some learning gaps that start to develop. There could be some behavioral problems that start to emerge. And so you start to see that when the child's placed in that environment. And therefore, there's an increase in the diagnoses at those ages. Now, there's another period that's common for first diagnosis, and that is around puberty. So in the middle school years. And there's a theory around that maybe the child had some issues earlier in life, but didn't really qualify for an autism diagnosis. But then all of the physiological changes and social pressures and cognitive changes that happen around middle school now put them into a category where they do qualify for a diagnosis. And that's called the double hit theory of autism. So there is some body of research out there on that. But then there's another set of speculations around maybe the child might have qualified at an earlier age, but the diagnosis was missed for some reason. Girls, for example, are very good at masking, much better at this process of behaving in a neurotypical, socially acceptable way. And so girls, the part of the theory is that girls may be getting missed because they're better at masking, and that the testing that we do for autism may not be sensitive enough to catch kids who may be doing that. So there's a number of different reasons why some diagnoses may come later, but the first age is 3, average around 5, and then there's another kind of peak around puberty.
And after the diagnosis, when is the best time for a family to reach out to you and for your services?
Straight away, or even before the diagnosis, because it's a process when to go through the diagnosis. And we've got coaches that have been through the process themselves as parents, and that can be very supportive. We have a group coaching program actually called Walk With Me. That is a parent group, and it is for families who are either pursuing a diagnosis or maybe have received one fairly recently rather, and are trying to just get their arms around everything that they need to know. And the sooner that you reach out, the better. There's support there, and that can be helpful.
That's really fantastic. So once the parents would reach out to you, they would join one of these groups, maybe the Walk With Me program. And from then on, you can support them either via coaching, or they can enroll in your coaching program so they can better manage the parenting as a parent of
Absolutely.
a neurodivergent child.
There is more than one of our coaches who originally enrolled because they were a parent and like, I want to be able to better manage this. Not only do I want to be able to better manage it, I want to be able to help other families around me know how to manage it as well. Yeah, very definitely. And there's a similar phenomenon among some of our self-advocate coaches, right? These are adults, many of whom got diagnosed much later in life as adults because their diagnosis was missed when they were a child. And oftentimes there's a very strong motivation on the part of those individuals to reach out to their community and make a difference in other people's lived experience, to make it a little bit better, get the resources that people need out there to them.
And can you share some tips for these families who may not be ready to reach out to you, or they may be hesitant? What is it that they can do to better support their children?
I think the answer is very similar to the one I gave you about the employers, right? It's really about giving as much agency as you can give to the child in an age appropriate way. I'll tell a story about one family. So there was a little boy having a lot of difficulty at preschool. First preschool, he was 3 years old. And when they lined up the children to go outside to the playground to play, this little boy would have kind of a meltdown and would be lashing out at the children around him. And so the teachers pulled him aside, and then they talked to the mom and they said, boy, we had this incident today. We're having a lot of trouble lining up to go to preschool. And so, we need to work on this. And so mom asked, did anybody ask him what's going on? And they said, no, we didn't actually. So we said, let's ask him what he thinks needs to be done about this situation. And so we said, hey, buddy, we know you're having problems when you line up with the other kids. What's going on with that? And he said, oh, that's because I'm going to get squished. And you're like, you're going to get squished. So what would make it so that you didn't get squished? And he said, I could stand at the back of the line. And that was it. End of problem. He stood at the back of the line and was no longer worried about getting squished.
Thank you for sharing that. Now, let me address the elephant in the room. What about the families who might be in denial of their child's condition?
There's no need for us to hang a label on anything that's happening with any client. If a family comes to us and says, we have a goal that we want to pursue, we have a change that we want to make, might be the way that they word it, then what we want to focus on is the change that they want to make. And so it doesn't matter whether they are bought into the idea that there's some underlying neurodivergence or a problem, because really what matters is what they want to accomplish and then how that's going to best work for them. And so when we work with our coaches, we do study all of these conditions, of course, because information about them is important. But when we're coaching an individual, it's all about the goals that they have and helping them to reach those goals. We can talk about the specific barriers that they experience and how they would like to work around those barriers, but there's no need to really hang a label on it. I think as long as we're staying in that space, then it's less threatening to parents. You don't necessarily need to have that label. You don't have to buy into it. Let's just start where we are and decide where we can go from here.
Thank you for sharing that advice. It's really nice that you're supporting the families wherever they are at in their stage of dealing with parenting, as challenging as it might be sometimes. Now, may I ask a challenging question?
Sure.
What's your stance on medication?
I'm not a physician. Medications have their place, right? There are certain medications that can be tremendously helpful to an individual. And there are also a lot of co-occurring conditions that tend to frequently co-occur with different neurodivergent conditions. For example, depression has a very high overlap. So does anxiety. And seeking medical support is an appropriate thing to do. And for the individual to make a decision about whether a medication could help them in coping or help whatever, issue that they're having is an appropriate thing to do. I think caution is warranted because obviously we all want to be careful about side effects and the other poor outcomes that can come about if you're over medicated and things like that. We want to be diligent. We want to be cautious about it, but by all means, we want to seek medical support for the physiological parts.
Thank you. That's very knowledgeable, obviously, that you take a really professional stance and you say that we're here to support you with the personal development part, maybe the professional development part of it, and the medical part is left to qualified professionals. And if people would be interested about reaching out to you for your services, where can they find you?
Visit our website. And then on our website, there are multiple different paths toward booking a free consultation, or we have an 800 number that's on the website and that people can reach out to. We have listings of some, not all, of our coaches are on the website. So you can different coaches that you might be able to work with. And if you reach out to me directly, I'm happy to do a consultation and also help you find the right coach.
That's really fantastic. And if people would like to get certified as a coach with your organization and maybe take up a career in working with people with neurodiversity, what's the best way for them to contact you?
Same answer. On the website, there is a page called Become a Coach. And so if you click on that link, that will take you to a page that describes the process for becoming a coach. And then the first set of training that you would take is described in detail there. And then there's a link to either inquire for more information or to enter a registration for the next upcoming start date, which will be in January now.
Okay, thank you. So Tamara, what would you advise the families who may be looking to get financial help to acquire your services?
There are a number of ways that the financial help may be available, and this will be a little bit general because it varies by state and it varies depending on what services you may already have access to. But I can give a couple of examples. For coaching services, people can look to their regional centers within your state. If you qualify for regional center services within different states, you may qualify for funding to allow you to participate in coaching. The other thing that you may qualify for is assistance through your employee assistance program. If you have insurance through your employer that offers an employee assistance program, sometimes those programs will sponsor coaching for a limited number of sessions. So that would be something to investigate. And then if you're interested in becoming a coach yourself, there are also services through state departments of vocational rehabilitation. And those departments will often fund a coach training for someone who's a self-advocate who is wanting to become a coach. So those are a few resources that you can investigate. And there are many others out there, but it's quite specific to everyone's individual circumstances. We can help with that in the conversation, in a consultation, for example.
Well, that's great if people are not ready to self-fund or self-finance some of these services, that there are options available for them as well.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for joining us today, Tamara, and sharing your wealth of knowledge and your experience with working so many neurodivergent people from all different fields, and talking about childhood, adulthood, teenage years, and all of this. I'm sure all our listeners would have found your experience and the information very valuable. Thank you for joining us. And for those who listened and found this helpful, please subscribe to our channel to hear about more coaches and new interviews coming up soon. Thank you and bye-bye.
Thank you, Mike. Bye-bye.